Between two flames, she was standing between two men who both wanted her dead, and both wanted her in their bed. The gun was cold against her temple. His hand was warm against her waist. And somewhere across the room, the other man watched with eyes that promised salvation and sin in equal measure. This is not a love story. Not exactly. It is a story about a woman who refused to be chosen and chose instead. Mia Calloway had never been late for anything in her 28 years of life. She was the kind of woman who set 3 alarms and arrived 10 minutes early anyway, who kept a spare pair of heels under her desk and a backup plan for every backup plan. She was precise and controlled and relentlessly prepared, and none of that mattered at all on the morning she burst through the glass doors of Voss and Cross Securities, with her dark hair half pinned and fighting free of its knot, and her heels hitting the marble floor in a rhythm that said she was already 12 minutes behind and fully aware of it. The elevator doors were sliding shut. She called out for someone to hold them, and a hand came through the gap. Long fingers, an expensive watch, the kind of unhurried gesture that belonged to a man who had never once needed to rush for anything in his life. The doors stuttered open. Mia stepped inside, and then she immediately wished she hadn't. He was leaning against the far wall of the elevator, like he owned it, which, as she would learn very shortly, he essentially did. Tall, dark-suited, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from something colder than marble, and eyes even darker than that. Those eyes moved to her, one slow, appraising sweep from her half-ruined hair down to her heels, and heat crawled up the back of her neck before she had the chance to stop it. He said she was bleeding. His voice was low and almost bored, the voice of a man delivering a mildly inconvenient observation rather than showing any particular concern. She looked down. A paper-thin cut across her palm where she had rushed through the revolving door without paying attention. She told him she was fine. He told her she should get it looked at. She told him again that she was fine, with the particular firmness of a woman who has been told what to do one too many times by men she didn't ask. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, something more controlled than that. And the elevator opened on the 14th floor, and he stepped out without looking back. Mia exhaled against the elevator wall and asked herself, silently, who the hell that was. She found out 20 minutes later when she slid into the boardroom and discovered him seated at the head of the table. He said her name like he had known it for years. He told her she was 12 minutes late. He told her his name was Damien Voss, and he told her to sit down. Damien Voss, the CEO, the man every financial newspaper in the country called ruthless and calculating, the man worth $9 billion by last count, the man her boss had specifically warned her about before this meeting. Don't stare, don't argue, and for God's sake don't bleed on him. She had managed 2 out of 3. She took her seat and decided that wasn't bad. She met Rafe Castillo for the second time in the parking garage at midnight, 3 days later, and she almost broke his knee with her car door before she recognized him. The first time had been 6 years ago, a summer when Mia had been 22 and considerably less careful about the men she let into her life. He had ridden a motorcycle and kissed her like the world was ending, and then left one morning without a word, without a note, without a single explanation, and she had rebuilt herself from the wreckage of it with the particular cold efficiency of a woman who decides once and for all that she will not be undone by someone else's choices again. Now he was leaning against her car with his arms crossed over a leather jacket, and an expression that was somewhere between apology and caution. He looked older, rougher around the edges, in the way of a man who had lived through several things that had not been gentle. He told her she looked good. She told him he looked like a man who was about to get his knee broken. Something moved in his amber eyes, amusement or regret, or some combination of both that she had no interest in untangling, and he told her he needed her help. She told him She had needed an explanation 6 years ago. She told him they were even. He said her name. Just her name, nothing else. And the specific way he said it, like it was the only word left in a sentence that had lost everything else, made her stop. He only ever said her name like that when things were serious. He told her there was money missing from Voss and Cross, a significant amount, and whoever had taken it was planning to frame her for it. The garage felt suddenly very quiet and very cold in the way that parking garages do at midnight when you have just received news that rearranges the shape of your immediate future. She asked him how he knew. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document, and when she opened it, her own signature was staring back at her. Neat, precise, unmistakably hers, on a transfer order she had never seen and never signed. He told her he was the one they had sent to investigate her, and he told her he didn't think she did it. Damien called her into his office the next morning before she had finished her first coffee. His corner suite had floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city and was furnished in grey steel and dark leather and clean, aggressive lines. A room built specifically to make people feel small in it. Mia stood in front of his desk and refused. He told her, without looking up from the file open in front of him, that someone had been embezzling from his company for 8 months. $23 million. The forensic trail ended at her. She told him that whoever built that trail had made a mistake, because she hadn't taken a cent. He looked up then. Those dark eyes held hers with the steady, measuring quality of a man who had built an empire by being correct about people and intended to remain correct now. He told her he knew. She asked him to repeat himself. He told her the signature was forged and the IP address rerouted, and that someone inside the building wanted her to take the fall, and that they did not yet know he had noticed. He closed the file and stood and came around the desk with the slow, deliberate movement of a man who had made a decision and was now executing it. He stopped just inside her personal space, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and clean and expensive. And he told her she needed to keep coming to work, to act normally, to pretend she didn't know. And then, in a voice that dropped just enough to make the word feel too large for the room, he told her to trust him. The word landed strangely between them, too intimate for a boardroom. She thought about Rafe in the parking lot that morning with his amber eyes and his apologies, and the way he had said her name in the dark. And she thought about this man with his empire and his certainty and the quiet authority of someone who was used to being the most dangerous person in any room he entered. 2 men asking for her trust. 2 entirely different sets of reasons. She was already in trouble and she knew it. Rafe found her in the stairwell at lunch. He had known she would be there. When Mia was stressed, she ate alone and she used the stairs. And he still remembered that about her, the way he still remembered many things. The way she looked when she laughed, completely unguarded, her head tipping back. The small crease between her brows when she was working through something difficult. The scar on her collarbone from a childhood bicycle fall she had described to him in bed at 2 a.m, her voice quiet, the room dark, both of them in that particular state of wakefulness that makes people honest.
Then he stepped back. Damien took her to dinner 3 nights later, framing it as strategy. He chose a restaurant where the candles were real, and the sommelier spoke with a Parisian precision, and the menu did not list prices, because the kind of people who ate there did not need to know. Mia stood in front of her mirror before leaving, and argued with herself about the red dress. It was an impulse she couldn't quite justify. She thought about Damien Voss, and the way he looked at her, like a problem he had decided was worth solving. And she thought about Rafe's hand on her waist in the cold of the stairwell, and she put the red dress on anyway, and stopped explaining herself. Damien stood when she arrived at the table. That surprised her. He did not seem like a man who stood for anyone. He told her she looked ready for a war, and she told him that was why they were there. They worked through dinner, account ledgers, server logs, the patient reconstruction of a conspiracy that had been running for months. And Mia discovered that Damien Voss was sharper than most people gave him credit for, and faster than she had expected in some directions, and slower in others. And she had the specific satisfaction of watching him realize that, watching him quietly revise his assessment of her in real time. Over the second glass of wine, he told her she was not what he had expected. She asked whether he had expected anything. He told her he had expectations about everything, and that she kept defying them, and that he found it irritating. She told him, good, and meant it entirely. He reached across the table and adjusted the small vase between them. A gesture that had no practical purpose whatsoever, just a reason to lean closer. And he told her quietly that when all of this was over, he wanted to take her to dinner again. Not for strategy. She held his gaze for a moment and told him to ask her then, when it was over. They caught the embezzler on a Thursday. His name was Hargrove, a senior VP who had been moving money into a shell company for 18 months with the careful patience of a man who believed himself untouchable. He had not accounted for Rafe's intelligence network, or Damien's resources, or the particular combination of those two things converging on Mia, who was at her desk at 2 a.m. while the two men argued methodology behind her, and who cracked the encryption key in the quiet after one of them had finally stopped talking. She said very quietly that she had it, and the room went still. Rafe was standing behind her left shoulder. Damien was behind her right. Both of them were staring at the screen, and both of them were aware of the other, and neither of them said anything about it. Rafe touched her shoulder, brief and warm and familiar. Damien did not touch her, but he looked at her the way a man looks when he is in the early stages of understanding something about himself that he had not previously accounted for. Later, after the calls and the lawyers and the long exhausted relief of a thing being finished, Mia walked out of the building alone and stood on the front steps in the cold night air. The city was spread out ahead of her, lit and restless. Both men followed her out. Of course they did. They stopped on either side of her, and the three of them stood there, and for a while nobody spoke. Rafe asked eventually what happened now. Mia breathed the cold air in and thought about choices, about the way the world kept requiring them, kept insisting that a person select a lane and stay in it, kept treating desire and history and the messy architecture of a human heart as problems to be solved rather than things to be lived in. Then she turned to Rafe and told him she forgave him. She said it clearly and without hesitation because she meant it. And then she told him that forgiveness was not a door back in, and he knew that, and something in him settled, grief and relief occupying the same space at the same moment, and he nodded once. She turned to Damien. He was watching her with those careful dark eyes, still and patient in the way of a man who has learned that waiting is a form of power. She told him to ask her to dinner. The real one. The corner of his mouth moved, further this time, closer to an actual smile than she had seen from him before. He said tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. She told him she would wear the red dress again. He said please, with a quiet devastation that was entirely at odds with everything she had observed about him in the weeks they had circled each other. And Mia laughed, real and unguarded, her head tipping back the way it always did, and thought that perhaps this was exactly what it felt like when the right story finally decided to begin. 6 months later, she was standing between two men again, but nobody was holding a gun this time. Rafe had called that morning to say he was leaving the country. New assignment, new chapter, the kind of clean ending that suits a man who has always moved forward better than he has ever moved back. He had come over with coffee and no apologies because they had already made their peace, and he understood that the story between them had found its ending, and he was graceful enough to respect that. He had held her face in both hands and kissed her forehead, and she had let him, because some loves are large enough to deserve that kind of goodbye, even when they are over. Damien arrived 10 minutes after Rafe left, because Damien had always had a particular talent for timing. He stood in her doorway, with his jacket over one arm and that almost smile that she had spent weeks learning to read, and she thought for what was probably the 100th time that she had absolutely no sensible business feeling this way about a man this dangerous. He asked if she was ready. She asked where they were going. He told her somewhere she wouldn't need a strategy. She told him she always had a strategy. He told her he knew, and he held the door open, and the city outside was gold and blue in the early evening light, the kind of light that makes everything look like the beginning of something. and he told her that was exactly why he was in love with her. She chose. Not because the story demanded it, not because she had run out of options or been cornered into it, or because one man had left and another had stayed. She chose because she, Mia Calloway, had looked clearly and honestly at what she wanted, and had decided, for once in her life, without apology, without the backup plan for the backup plan, to simply reach out and take it.